From wherever you are around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be exploring the world of deception and lying. It's true, I'm not lying to you. We have an expert with us, Stan Walters. He is known as the Lie Guy. He's written 2 great books called The Truth About Lying, How to Spot a Lie and Protect Yourself from Deception, and Principles of Kinetic Interview and Interrogation, the 2nd edition. He teaches courses in kinetic interviewing and interrogation to law enforcement officials throughout the country. Mr. Walters has served as a subject matter expert on interview and interrogation techniques at Johns Hopkins University. Let's welcome Mr. Walters to the circle. Welcome to the circle, Mr. Walters.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. It's great to be with you.
This is exciting stuff. Like I said, I've read both of your books twice. We talked off camera. Wonderful books. Really get a great analysis of human behavior, especially in a really stressful situation a lot of these individuals are in. But before we get into that, how did you get started in all this?
About 35 years ago, starting as a young investigator, nobody told me how to interview. Nobody explained how to do it. And at that point, I didn't realize how significant, how important good interviews were to solving cases. So the very first interview I did, I blew it, obviously. And my supervisor at the time, I asked him, well, how'd you know the guy was lying? He said, you just know. I said, yeah, but how do you know? He said, we just know. So how'd you get him to confess? He said, I talked to him. I said, well, I talked to him too. He said, yeah, but I'm good. And that was my first training. So if I was going to survive as an investigator, I realized that this is a skill that I had to master and work on. And just became very fascinated with it and began to study and research and applying the principles I was reading and found what worked and didn't work.
And how long did it take you to write that first book you did?
The first edition, it's about 16 months time you get started, and wore out a laptop on it.
I can imagine so.
But it went so well, the second edition, I had people calling from academies and from universities, said, could you please bump it up? Could you give us more supporting science in detail? And so I added about 100 digital photographs of live interrogations. Part of what I do is, in my training, is I take students to prison, and they will spend 8 hours in an institution interviewing inmates. Now,
wow.
You've seen classes where people have role play and they talk to each other and pretend. It's like scrimmaging yourself. You don't know really how good you are until you get a good, tough team. So on a whim, I decided I'd take the students to prison. And they learned extensively from the experience. They didn't have a case file. They didn't know the inmate's name. And they're doing what I refer to as a cold read. They had to get everything from the very beginning. I've done that now. I've been in 30 prisons. Wait a minute. I've visited 30 prisons in 16 states and 1 foreign country. I have 1,200 videotapes of those inmate interviews that I use for research and training purposes.
1,200?
1,200 of them.
And what's the name of your organization again?
Stan B. Walters and Associates, Inc. And another company I work under, this name is because it's easier, it's Truth and Deception, Inc.
Truth and Deception, Inc. So we'll tell that, make sure we get those website addresses at the end of the show as well,
sure,
so people can go to that. That's wonderful. Okay, so let's get started here and start digging in. I wanted to kind of focus more on the verbal statement analysis, because that part of your book was fascinating about that, both books actually, talking about it, and I don't think a lot of people have heard much of it on that subject matter. The other thing I wanted to ask you too, maybe we'll start off with this question before we get into the verbal analysis. Terrorists. I know I've asked other interrogators, do you notice a difference between a member of a drug cartel compared to a terrorist, compared to a gang member? And they said the terrorists were up on the top, elite in the sense of deceiving.
Yeah, and then deception only works when, there's got to be 2 parties. So if we're deceived, 50% of the fault is ours, because we created the venue, the medium for it to occur. And that's one of the things that I've looked at for years. Should there be a difference in how human beings deceive? And I think I'm getting to the core of it now. If we try to interview on the basis of moral code or personal character or guilt, for example, like the terrorist or the psychopaths, they're not going to register. They don't have the empathy for their victim. And if we try to interview them on a, don't you feel bad? Don't you feel for what you've done? Don't you see what you're doing is wrong? Well, they don't have that measure. So I thought there's got to be something still behind that creates deception. There's a root point. Even with the terrorist, even the psychopaths, the most professional or experienced liars. There's one thing everybody has, and that's the vision of the truth.
And that's called the root point?
Yeah, they have the vision of the truth. They know what they did, they were involved. Now, how they feel about or think about it is kind of the next layer, the reaction response behavior. Here's a deception on the other screen. When I'm interviewing, that creates a dissonance in the mind of the person trying to sustain the deception. So when they know what the reality is, but they've got to keep up this ruse at the same time. So as I keep using penetrating questions, disrupting or causing that dissonance or being of two minds, the verbal behaviors still jump out, even with the terrorist or the psychopath or savages. So we've got to think beyond outside of ourselves as a normally organized person when we look at those folks that are extreme. Yeah, they're a step above in their skills of deception, but it's our tactics that have to change if we're going to talk to them appropriately.
So that's something you actually show people, is how to be able to detect that or how to work around those type of people then.
Correct.
Fascinating.
Correct. Finding that Genesis point, I like to call it, I'm hacking their deception.
I like that. Well, we won't mess around with North Korea here.
Yeah.
So let's get into the statement analysis. I know we have a few things there. How would you start off that chapter? I know I have specific questions right now, but I don't want to jump into the chapter really ahead of time. How would you start off that chapter? What is statement analysis actually?
If you think of the body language and the speech compared side by side, body language takes a greater workload as the observer. And in speech cues are more specific. Analogy I like to use, let's say I was going to navigate my way from New York to Los Angeles, but I was using a compass. So there's a wider margin of error. I can get there. I mean, Lewis and Clark did it, but they had sextants and other stuff. So there's a wider margin of error. So if you're off just a little bit, how far off are you going to be when you get to the West Coast? Verbal cues are like navigating with GPS. There's almost a more instant correction. There's an instant analysis, and you have a smaller margin of error. So thinking of those terms, where would you put your energies? The one that's the system's most efficient. And verbal, now I don't throw the body language out. It still has value in reading emotion and background stress. Next thing is the approach as the interviewer. We have a very confrontational type of approach or guilt assumptive approach and a very narrative approach. I use a narrative approach. Tell me what happened, or describe to me the dialogue you had when you talked to the pharmacist on the phone, or when you had your meeting with your source. Talk about the conversation. Tell me what you all discussed, and I let the person narrate. We know deceptive subjects' tactics or strategies that they leave out time, people, and places.
And their stories.
So in their stories, I start looking for those gaps. So as an example of time, I've got a tape I use of a rapist, one of our prison interviews, and he describes how he sees this couple in the park, and he thinks it's a buddy in a car that he knows. He approaches the car, and they invite him in. Yeah, that happens a lot. They go off the location, and he said then the girl wanted to perform oral sex with him. And he said, then after a couple of hours, wow, after a couple of hours, so all of a sudden there's this big jump in time. Then he goes on the story. So when I move as the interviewer from the narration to the cross-examination, I'll ask questions about the time gap, because that's the part he's left out.
Interesting.
Following that, in 40 seconds, he mentions having a camera and pictures 19 different times in 40 seconds.
19 times in 40 seconds?
So that tells me that's a critical part of his story, because he really wants you to believe the camera was just a lark and everybody, let's take pictures, it'll be fun. Who were depicted in pictures? Who was holding the camera? If your wife saw these pictures, what would she think was going on? Would people have a hard time understanding what's happening in the pictures? I'll keep probing with those questions in that area, creating that dissonance, disrupting his confidence in the deception. Well, the harder he works, the more verbal cues begin to appear.
Ah. And it's kind of hard for him to remember all those lies, isn't it?
Good example. I met with a friend from a big corporation and was going to discuss with going to his company and teaching his engineers how to ask better questions in their what's called a murder board. Let's brainstorm what could be the worst thing that happened to this project. And we're at this gourmet hamburger place, if there's such a thing as gourmet hamburger. And I ordered like a barbecue blue burger or something. And Mark ordered a hamburger made with lamb. And so I asked the waiter, I said, what's the, he said, oh, the black and blue, everybody likes that hamburger, it's really good, and so forth. Then Mark said, I'll have the lamb, and he asked the waiter, how's that one? He said, it's good. And the waiter went off. I said, Mark, do you realize what you just missed? He said, no, it didn't occur to him. Think of the way he answered me versus the way he answered your question. And it dawned on him. He said, he wasn't telling me everything he knew, was he? He said, that's right. He withheld from you. When he comes back, ask him some more details about the lamb hamburger. So the guy came back. He asked him about the lamb hamburger. The guy says, I don't like lamb. Some people like it. Depends on which cook is there. Some cooks like a little dry. Some cooks like a little moist. So I'm not sure. This guy likes a little dry. So if you like the lamb. Now, he missed all that because he didn't follow up.
How fascinating is that? I want a lamb.
Simple way to do it, yeah. So we do the same things every day in our business conversations, or as therapists, or as the lead engineer on an engineering project. Sometimes we just let our own minds fill in the gap, and that creates the venue for the misinterpretation or the deception.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
You mentioned two other things that you said that people kind of are distorting or not accurate enough when they're trying to deceive. People and places you mentioned as well. Mm-hmm. How do those get incorporated?
Well, you hear, well, somebody must have come in, or I don't know who it was, or anybody, or everyone I work with, all the guys I know, or I don't know him. And memory lapses kind of encompass all those. So memory lapse is probably the easiest, most frequent way to deceive.
I don't remember.
Pardon, go ahead.
I don't remember is one of their famous lines.
Yeah. And you got to be careful what you're asking too. So you got to take that into account. The other one is that, well, I don't know where we were, or was reading a case of an alleged carjacking victim. One of the things I noticed in the statement of the carjacking victim, because she'd given here's what happened, is that she would leave out blocks of time. He had me drive around for quite a while, drive around town to these unknown locations. She also made sure in her story 3 different times to specifically say she couldn't see his face because of his hooded sweatshirt. Made special effort at that. Therefore, she's leaving out something about the person. So I went back and said, okay, here's what our problems are. In a conversation in the car, she says that the bad guys asked her about her boyfriend, asking about her parents and paying for college, and she's reported that he's made her go to the ATM, withdraw a lot of money. So there's where your 3 problems are. Well, it turns out it was a false report. Going to file a fraud case with the bank saying she'd been robbed, and relationship wasn't good with her boyfriend. So if he thinks he might have lost me or whatever, he'll love me and he'll come and put a ring on it and we'll go get married and life will be great. That was all for attention getting.
Really? That's amazing.
So now I can use with the terrorists who has a cover story and have him go through the sequence of events that he's memorized, for example. But they will not be able to shift modality.
Modalities meaning?
Time, sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, cognitive, emotional. So I might have, for example, if I were to ask you a generic question, what do you remember about 9/11? Well, that's the whole internet. But if I were to say, what images do you recall the most that caught your attention? So now I've shifted. I might take my terrorist suspect and ask, okay, you said you came in through LaGuardia Airport and you just came in through Amsterdam. Go through again. Tell me how you got to the airport at Amsterdam and the transportation mode you used before you got on the plane. Well, they never think in reverse.
Oh, so you got to go backwards.
Go backwards. And what the research shows by several great researchers, that is used on victims, cognitive interviewing, to help victims recall information. Well, by chance, we learned liars can't do that. So I might focus on images, specific phrases or sentences you used. If it applies, I might use smell. For example, an arson case, what odors did you smell around the warehouse? Touch. I used on a kidnapping case. The parents falsified the report of a kidnapped child that the mom had let starve to death while dad was on maneuvers for the military. He was breaking down. I got a call about 2 o'clock in the morning, Stan, what do we do? I said, well, I know he's emotional type of personality. Remind him that daddies are the shining knights. They protect their little girls. And he's got to help his daughter, and it's tough, but he's got to work hard and do it right now and protect her. Well, remember the last time you held her in your arms. Turned out the last time this guy held his daughter's body was just before he threw her body with a weight on it into a pond to disguise the kidnapping. And that's the moment it just overwhelmed him and he couldn't deal with it and it broke the case.
Wow.
So I can use it with, that's the one thing is to look beyond race, beyond gender, beyond age, beyond intelligence. The mechanism of deception is the same with every human being. And just hack that deception.
Let me ask you a quick question about,
Sure.
Do you use the guilty knowledge test, I think it's called, the GKT or something?
Yeah, no, the polygraph uses that, yeah. And I'm not an examiner with polygraph. One of my friends are, and I'm a social member of the association. So they'll ask, was she killed with a hanger, with a phone cord, or electrical cord? And they'll see which one he spikes the most at. It might work on those without conscience because it's a knowledge-based type of question. But if I were to ask, did you like her? Do you feel bad about her being gone? Do you feel guilty about it? Would not register. I heard an interviewer ask Drew Peterson. Remember, he's the cop from Bolingbrook, Illinois?
Sure.
Can you look me in the eye and tell you had nothing to do with the suspicious death of your third wife or disappearance of your fourth wife? And he said, look you right in the eye about that. And the reporter said, well, I don't understand how you can feel that way about those women and not react to that. Well, that's the wrong question. In my opinion, he's a very antisocial personality. He didn't have empathy for the victims. If you were more cognitive, instead of emotion-based question, use more factual-based, logic-based or tangible type of questions, you get a better reaction from it.
Interesting. Now, you got some stuff in your book that I want to see if we can talk a little bit about as well.
Sure.
You mentioned qualifiers.
Yeah, most of the time, almost. I almost forgot it. I rarely leave the kids alone for a long time. I don't usually leave the child in the car before we're going to the mall. I don't remember why I did this time. Basically, I'm a good person. And two big ones, they're kind of like erasers. You're not going to believe this, but they sound strange, however, and it just erases everything the person has just told you. Just like escape clause.
What does that basically mean? I've seen that, I've read that in your book, and I've listened to so many people, and I can't tell if it's a generational thing. Because I can't imagine everybody's lying to me when I'm walking around.
Yeah.
But
and it's a good point, too, Doc, because we look at clusters. Some language creeps into our current culture. For example, current ones right now. that I pick up from the street and from inmates. Now they'll tell you that they're Gucci.
They're Gucci?
They're Gucci, and it means genuine or real. I'm not faking you. Or that I'm 100s or 300s. Well, instead of being I'm 100% honest or 300% honest, which is just a shortcut. It's shorthand for it. Or we were talking about time a while ago. I walked in the house and whoop-de-woo, there she was.
So these are qualifiers, but with normal current lingo.
Street lingo, yeah. I think whoop-de-woo is the same thing as Seinfeld's yada yada. I'm not sure. It's just, just to skip him.
I'll have to ask Jerry that one. That's too funny. Now, there's something that really fascinates me, too. And I remember seeing this. Well, actually, there's two things that popped up in my head now. I was watching a long time ago. I hate to admit this, but I was watching Kitchen Nightmares. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think was in your book, there were two of them. There was pronoun shifting. Yep. And then there was distancing language.
Right. Pronoun shift is often you see is depersonalization. It's a deliberate emotional separation. For example, a suspect I was talking to referred to, he came into his bedroom and saw it, and it was right there. He's referring to his mother's body after he murdered her. And in tape conversations I've listened to with Ed Kemper in California from 80s and Jeffrey Dahmer, both mentioned that once you see people as something less than human, when you take that identity away from them, it's much easier to do to them things you shouldn't be doing. And part of that depersonalization is, for example, I'm uncomfortable around those people. And it personalizes it, and it creates a separation from you and from that group or from that individual. And so it's easier when you don't see them as something less than human or less than an equal to act inappropriately with them.
It's kind of what Hitler did with the Jews. I mean, made them draw the cartoons as almost rats, I think it was.
Yep. Well, and you see it in some of our current Middle Eastern terrorist groups refer to some of the people that they're nothing more than cattle meant for slaughter. To even see some of those groups, religious groups and faith groups, as nothing more than just cattle in a marketplace that you would slaughter and butcher.
Let's do a little bit. We got a few minutes left, and I want to tackle a little bit about body language. How can you make a distinction between somebody, let's say Lord forbid I'm in the interrogation room. Mm-hmm. How do you make a distinction between me just being extremely nervous for whatever reason? Maybe somebody got killed or murdered, and for some reason I look like the suspect because I was the only one there, and I'm holding the knife because I found it on the ground. Sure. And I'm paranoid now. I got Stan Walters. I just read his book. Oh, he's going to crack me like an egg. What do I? How do you distinguish that?
I push more using body language as an emotional reading. Body language is very, very unreliable when we talk about deception. Very unreliable. I was involved in research at John Jay College in New York with NYPD, State Department, the Defense Department, and New York District Attorney's offices. We took 36 felony cases. So in the videotaped interview, the subject was asked, "What'd you do with the gun?" He said, "I threw it on the roof." We could prove that it was truth or deceptive statement by crime scene search and evidence and so forth. So we had ground truth. We only found 2 body language areas that had barely statistical significance, just barely over chance. And that was behaviors of aversion, with the body's turning away. I like to call it a dislike behavior. Something you don't like to turn away from. So the turn, twist of torso. The other one is negation. And it's eyes, nose, mouth, ears. But they were only like 58, 59%.
Oh, wow.
No other body language cue was above that rating.
That's really shocking. So for deception, it doesn't work well. Maybe for other things it might, but not for deception then.
Now, one of the things that Dr. Ekman's done a great deal of work is with microexpressions.
Getting ready to ask.
The point is when the speech and the body are out of sync. So there's 7 expressions that he talks about that are common to all human beings. What they're looking for is when my verbal cue is inconsistent with that one of those 7 expressions he talks about. That's just about the only way we can really have decent success in looking at body language.
Does it?
Go ahead. No, well, I might, if I see that you're, for example, in anger, and I can see from your body language, then my tactics will be different if I recognize that you're maybe in depression from some of your physical feedback and your verbal feedback. So that's what I use the body language for, is to help me generate a good tactic and strategy in interviewing you and getting compliance out of you without contaminating you.
So you're really sticking with the verbal analysis component, like you were saying, just supplement the body language.
Yep.
Interesting.
Very early on, it was believed that all liars experienced a certain amount of guilt, and it would be lots of body language that occurred. That was the starting theory in the early 60s. Since empirical research has not supported that. In many cases, in deception, the body actually will shut down. They get very still because all their energy is going to thinking, and because of the cognitive load. The analogy I like to use is in Star Trek, when Kirk or Picard says, all power to forward shields. Well, all the person's energies in lying is a cognitive process. And they literally can measure the body actually slowing down or stopping during that extreme cognitive load or mental process. So it's a quiet period for the body.
And the cognitive load, if I remember correctly, is it greater when you're lying?
Yes, because it takes more energy. And they compared the lying to somebody doing a long algebraic, difficult mathematical question. And they saw the same tonic arousal drop in both cases when there's a lot of mental activity at work.
I wonder if it can help with weight loss. Anyway.
So, good point. Hey, there's a new book.
Never know.
Yes, next bestseller.
Well, we covered body language, we covered verbal analysis. I'm looking at my notes to see if there's anything else we wanted to miss out, but let's go ahead and go back and show people the books right here so you don't want to miss them. The first book that he wrote, which is Principles of Kinetic Interview and Interrogation. He's got the second edition out. The next book, The Truth About Lying, which I think is his most recent book, correct?
Of the two, yes. Mm-hmm.
How to Spot a Lie and Protect Yourself from Deception. Fabulous books. Well, Mr. Walters, that was fabulous. Thank you so much for that. That was a lot of fun.
Well, I enjoy doing it.
Want to see what we have what we call a fastball question.
Okay.
So sometimes we ask that and put you on the hot seat here, but the fastball question is this. Could you, how would you say it? Who would be the most difficult person for you to find out if they're lying or not?
My wife.
Your wife.
Because there's too much emotional involvement. Too emotionally close. And so sometimes the people we're the closest to, because we have a preconception and we have things we do not want to believe. Not that I believe my wife lies to me, but that would be the toughest. And then the second probably be my kids.
Your kids too?
Yeah. Just again, because you want to believe the best, and unless they're really blatant and have problems. But the biases get in the way sometimes. So that can be a challenge to overcome. Somebody that you're very close to emotionally for quite some time, we don't pick up the signals like we should.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much again for being on the show. Where can we get more information about you and what you do?
You can find me at thelieguy.com. I'm also over on Facebook and Twitter and on LinkedIn. You're more than welcome to connect with me, and I've got some resources for you, even on YouTube. I'm working a series right now, 101 Tips for Interviewers and Interrogators.
Oh, wonderful. Can't wait to see that.
2-minute episodes on YouTube come out for the next 2 years.
Wonderful. Again, thank you so much, Mr. Walters.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. Remember, our motto is simple. Wherever there's psychology involved, whether it's the truth or not, we're going to be there. See you next time, everyone.